Meeting of the Ames Zoning Board of Adjustment for January 10th, 2024. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial board created by the City of Ames. The board's purpose is to decide on applications for special use permits, exceptions, and variances to the zoning ordinances, applications for conditional use permits in the floodplain, requests for reasonable accommodations because of a disability, and appeals of decisions to the zoning enforcement officer. As a board of the city, we welcome all testimony. We make our decisions based on the facts and evidence as allowed under city code and presented in our open meeting. Testimony before the board must be given under oath or affirmation. If proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that testimony be focused on new facts or evidence not already presented. We ask that you come to the microphone if you wish to speak so that your testimony will be audible and may be recorded. Before speaking, please fill out and complete an orange information card and hand it to the recording secretary. When you are testifying, please address your remarks to the board. We also ask that the proceedings be orderly. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is an independent volunteer board of citizens. We are not part of the city administration. We are served in our efforts this evening by Jane Chang, Assistant City Attorney, Kelly Diekman, Planning and Housing Director, Justin Moore, City Planner, and Natalie Rickmeyer, Recording Secretary. The order of proceedings for each application will be as follows. First, an oral statement summarizing the issue and procedural steps will be presented by the staff. Second, testimony and evidence will be presented by the applicant. Third, testimony may be heard from any members of the audience who wish to speak in support or in opposition to the appeal. Next, the board will give the applicant and city staff an opportunity to present concluding summaries and arguments. And finally, the board will discuss the issues and evidence and come to a decision. On the agenda for tonight, we have 3 items. First is the approval of the meeting of the minutes from December 13th. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting of the minutes from December 13th, 2023?
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Whitehouse.
Second.
Second by Patton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion passed. The meetings from December 13th, 2023 are approved. The second item on our agenda is a public hearing on a request for an exception for a minor area modification to allow reduction of the required minimum 5-foot side yard setback by 2 feet for an addition to the principal structure at 2623 Somerset Drive.
All right, good evening. So this item is a little bit different than what you had seen a few months ago. Originally, the property owner had applied for a variance for placement of a detached accessory structure in the same location. That variance was denied. They have chosen to proceed with formulating a building permit application to treat it as an addition to the garage. So it has to be constructed different than the accessory building that was first proposed here. So if you are in addition to the principal structure, you can then take advantage of a request for what we're looking at tonight, which is a minor area modification to allow for a partial encroachment into the setback. So the findings are considerably different than a variance. A variance is really looking at a hardship versus the minor area modification is really in a condensed form thinking about compatibility. So there is some element of judging necessity in the first criteria, but overall you're generally looking at is this encroachment allow for a safe use of the property? Does it have compatibility with the surroundings? Does it meet the general objectives of the zoning? So we have side yard setbacks for generally 2 purposes. One is for the basic general safety elements related to space between buildings. Building code comes in behind that and has much more detail and requirements about how you build things depending on how far walls are from property lines. But you can encroach closer than 5 feet and still meet building code requirements. So we have the 3-foot requirement as the max allowance for encroachment towards the property line. They're proposing about 3.5 feet as that separation distance. So we believe that meeting the building code requirements for an addition to the structure would allow for that general safety and general welfare element to be met. And then from a compatibility and aesthetics perspective, we're looking at this, and you can see in the packet, it was originally framed out as that structure. So you have a pretty good idea what this is really going to look like because of what was originally put up there. So you're looking at a narrowing of the space between the 2 homes. It's a 1-story addition. We felt that it could be found to be compatible with the surroundings of the area due to its size, its lower profile, So we thought that the applicant had made the case that they can be found to comply with the overall minor area modification criteria. So we're recommending approval. We do have 3 conditions. A couple of these are to rectify the fact that this was originally a code enforcement issue. So to make sure they follow through, get the building permit, adjust the structure to get the approvals they need to finalize this and go forward with the project. The other condition is a mandatory requirement that we have that you record the minor area modification on with your property at the county. Therefore, a future buyer understands that they have something that is permitted but doesn't meet standard code in terms of setbacks. So that's just a recording of a document requirement. And the third requirement is just that, again, it's finished in materials that are compatible with the house, not some other materials. So that feeds into the support for it as an addition to the home and not as some separate accessory structure. So do we have any questions for staff?
There were also some other building code requirements, as I remember from.
So this doesn't get into the actual building code requirements. So if this is approved tonight, then they'll proceed over to inspections and they'll work through what all the building code requirements are. So this is the first step towards getting a compliant addition.
Any questions from the board? If there aren't any questions, we'll proceed. If the applicant's here, if you want to come forward and address the board, you can. We'll swear you in before you do that. Can I have your name and address, please?
Beth Foreman, 2623 Somerset Drive, Ames, Iowa.
Ms. Foreman, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
All right. You may proceed. I think we're pretty familiar with this, so,
I've got here.
okay.
I thought you'd be happy to see the length of my comments here. Thank you for coming out in the cold to look at this tonight. Again, we had applied for the other kind of variance, and one of the reasons we did that is we weren't even aware this was an option until the report came out for you guys to look at it the last time. So this really does make more sense for us to do it this way. So we're applying for this minor area exception. And I just want to point out that we're aware that that means we need to get the building permits and we need to work with the city inspector to be sure that we meet all those building codes. The neighbor that is to the north is here. The other half of that couple that lives there. And Brian is also a civil engineer. So he's also looking at ways that we might be able to meet the building codes, in different ways with an engineering perspective. Again, that we know that we need to follow those building codes, and we do have the siding and the windows and the shingles that match. That's all I have. Thank you again for your time.
I had one question for you, though. I assume if he's helping you, he's okay with the addition. Okay. It's your say, but you can tell me. Okay.
So should I note that for the record, the neighbor acknowledged support? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah,
right there?
That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
We won't swear him in and everything.
The minutes won't otherwise know.
That was basically the only question I had after I looked at the application and looked at the diagram again was, hey.
Yeah, this really focuses on that compatibility element in terms of how does it impact a neighbor joining the the proposal.
Now, if we get a rash of these from that Somerset neighborhood that people want to add.
I mean, it's not the easiest thing to do.
Right.
It's a tool just for very rare circumstances.
Yeah.
Is what we've seen. We haven't seen these very often.
Okay. Any other questions for staff or for the applicant? Okay. Do I have a motion based on this item agenda at this time?
Motion to adopt alternative 1.
Okay. I will second that motion, including the 3 conditions that are included with that alternative. Have a roll call vote.
Schneider,
Aye.
Patton,
Aye.
Whitehouse.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Anyone wishing to appeal this may do so by filing a writ of certiorari with the district court within 30 days of the filing of the decision, correct? Got that right now. Okay, we're going to move to our third item on the agenda, which is a public hearing on a request for a floodplain variance at 1006 South Dayton Place.
Right. Okay, thank you. This item before you this evening is a request for a variance to allow placement of factory-built homes at 1006 Dayton Place with the lowest floored and elevation of base flood elevation plus 1 foot, where otherwise base flood elevation plus 3 feet is required. Typically, you see a lot of Chapter 29 zoning requests as a board. However, one of the other chapters that you do have decision-making authority over is for requests for conditional use permits, for variances and that sort of thing in Chapter 9, which is our floodplain development standards. In this particular case, the applicant is Chuck Winkleblack on behalf of Flummerfelt Shady Grove. They are requesting to have this variance for Shady Grove Mobile Home Park, which is located here. I'm going to go down to the map real quick for you.
South
There we are. It's right there off of Dayton, just to kind of give you some perspective. They're out by 30 and 35 to the northeast of the hotels out there.
Across from
south.
Tyson's. Back in there.
And then there's a perspective of the floodplain for you. So just some background. This is a mobile home park that's been in existence here for a number of decades. There are mobile homes that are there currently, which have been there for quite a number of years. So some are older, some are newer, but has existed out here since the 1970s. For most of its existence, the flood insurance rate map has shown some manner of floodplain out here that the property's been located within. So just to kind of give you perspective on the base flood elevation freeboard, or elevation standard as we call it. So base flood elevation is the elevation at which you will start to see flooding in a 100-year flood event. As you go above that, 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, you have a certain degree of what is assumed to be protection from floodwaters. Again, that's based on a 100-year flood event. And so in the case of the city of Ames, we have a base flood elevation standard that is base flood elevation plus 3 feet. So what that means is that the lowest floor of a home or a building has to be elevated or protected to BFE plus 3. That's the standard that we have adopted, and we've had that adopted now for probably close to 15 years. And so all of our development that you see in the floodplain, in what we call the floodway fringe, which is the area where this particular location is, it is always permitted and developed. All new development or all additions accordingly are developed to this standard. This also applies to things such as utilities, certain types of utilities, mechanical and electrical structures, and that sort of thing. By contrast, the state of Iowa has a floodplain jurisdiction outside of the city. Also, they have jurisdiction over the city, but they delegate authority to the city of Ames to have our own additional set of standards that they approve of. And the state of Iowa's, otherwise, their standard is BFE plus 1. So they only have a 1 foot requirement. When a variance is requested such as this, one of the things that we have to do along with the applicant is hold a consultation meeting with the Department of Natural Resources, which we have done. And they give us a general idea of whether or not they would even approve something like this. Because if there's any affirmative decision based on a floodplain variance tonight, after this decision, this must then go to the Department of Natural Resources for the final legal approval on their end. We have consulted with the DNR, and they've indicated that as long as no variance permitted a base flood elevation for lowest floor at this location below BFE +1, they would likely not have an issue with it. So we've gone through that process. After we did that, the applicant filed the application. So I'll just go through, I want to go through the standards. I'm not going to read them in detail. If we need to talk about one more in detail, we can. I just want to highlight them for you tonight. And that way you just have a general idea of what they mean, since this is not necessarily a variance that comes before the board very often, at least this type of variance. And then just give you our conclusion. So the first standard in the variance criteria is that no variance shall be granted for any development within the floodway overlay district, which would result in any increase in BFE, in base flood elevation. Consideration of the effects of any development on flood levels should be based on the assumption that an equal degree of development would be allowed for similarly situated lands. So in this particular case, this request is not within the floodway. You can see its relation to the floodway there. It is in the fringe, in the floodway fringe, the 1% chance in the 100-year floodplain. So in this particular case, staff concludes there is no impact on the floodway, and therefore there is no impact on increased flood heights or velocities as a result. So that particular criteria is met. Now, the second in that section is more involved, and it's one that is a pretty vital finding. And it relates directly to the applicant's request, is that in order for them to meet BFE +3 with the lowest floor of these mobile homes, as mobile homes are replaced, like for like in this particular mobile home development, that it creates an unnecessary hardship. That's one of the main bases of their application. So in this particular case, what we have to look at is a determination that failure to grant the variance would result in an unnecessary hardship to the applicant. And also that a showing of good and sufficient cause is there. So we talked through that with you. I'm not going to go into it again in detail unless you'd like to. We did conclude that in this particular case, due to the nature of a mobile home park and the applicant's claims of what he's able to fit in the mobile home park based upon meeting the current floodplain development standards, and given the unique nature of mobile home parks, that we can find that the criteria is met for that. And we take into consideration here that this is a pre-existing mobile home park. This isn't brand new. That would be a fairly open and shut decision. But in this particular case, you have a lot of history and you have a unique nature with the way mobile homes are allowed to be constructed and set next to each other within the city. So if we want to talk through that one, we certainly can, but we did conclude that that was met. We felt that that was a pretty key finding in this. So in that particular case, again, it's pre-existing. This is an RLP zone on the zoning side, so it has its own set of standards for mobile home parks, which are different than even smaller single-family home subdivisions. The next criteria is that in granting of the variance, it will not result in increased flood heights or additional threats to public safety, public expense, create nuisances, or cause fraud on or victimization of the public. This particular site, as I said, has been in existence for many years. There are mobile homes that set out here that have virtually no elevation, so the lowest floor right now probably hardly meets BFE or just slightly above. Some homes are newer and they've been set more recently. They may meet the standards. So as we go forward and we talk about this in the findings, we will require, regardless of any decision by the board tonight, there will have to be consistent permitting that's done. Given the deep history of this, back to the 1970s. There have been a lot of different ordinances that have been in place, and the map has at least somewhat changed over time. And so you have a lot of different ages on the homes and a lot of different phases of development that have occurred out here. So we did not find that requiring, or at least allowing or granting of any variance or not, and then of course requiring all of the conditions to meet any sort of a floodplain permit under our standards would increase any sort of a threat to the public or cause increased flood heights, nuisances, fraud, or any of that. The next criteria is that a variance shall only be granted upon determination that the variance is the minimum necessary considering the flood hazard to afford relief. This particular one, again, is that BFE +1 state standard is really going to guide this. So the request of the applicant is to go to BFE +1 down 2 feet from BFE +3. And in our view, we can find that that's the minimum necessary to afford relief, and that criteria is met. The next criteria is pretty straightforward, and we have already discussed this with the applicant, but in cases where the variance does involve a lower level of flood protection for buildings than what's ordinarily required in this ordinance, which is what's being requested here, the applicant shall be notified in writing over the signature of the administrator that it will result in increased premium rates for flood insurance, and that that type of construction does increase risks to life and property. So this is something that we have to do. It's talked about in our ordinance. If a variance is granted, the administrator, will notify through formal letter this information to the applicant, and we discuss that with the applicant. And that's just the reality of the situation. The city does not govern or have any input into flood insurance insofar as what rates are set or anything like that. The final criteria is that all variances granted shall have the concurrence or approval of the Department of Natural Resources. As we stated before, any affirmative decision that's made tonight for a variance will have to go forward to the DNR for their formal approval. We have had that early meeting with them along with the applicant, and they've stated their position on it. So we found that criteria was met. You also have, I believe it's 12 additional considerations there that we address in the report when considering variances on things that you can look at on how to base your decision in this particular case. So we can certainly talk through those as well. And other than that, I think that sums up the request and our findings. We do recommend as staff approval of alternative number 2. If the board deems it so, that would be our request. That is for a 15-year variance. So that would authorize a variance for new mobile homes, new permitted mobile homes to be placed at a elevation of BFE +1. And by elevation, that means their lowest floor. And that would be in effect for 15 years. So that would go to, I believe, 2039. At that point, the owner of the park would need to comply with the current standards in place at that time, or come back to the board for another request. That concludes my report, and I can answer any questions if you have them.
I have a question regarding finding 2 or B, I don't know, the unnecessary hardship. You said the zone is RLP. What does that entail?
Yeah, so the RLP zone in Chapter 29 is designed specifically for mobile home parks, factory-built home parks.
So there's no alternative use under that zone?
In this particular, yeah, in the case of RLP, no, it's pretty much targeted at mobile home parks, factory-built home parks. That's the term that it uses, is factory-built. Mobile home is a casual term, but it's factory-built homes.
I understand.
How has the flood fringe changed? Has it expanded recently?
In this particular location, with regard to this site, it hasn't really changed materially here. It's been out here in this area for a number of years, even decades. So it hasn't really expanded. Meaning, I mean, this site has been in the floodplain since at least the 1980s, I would say, going back on the old maps.
I don't know if the criteria changed at all. That
I mean,
not the actual flooding, of course, we don't have control over that. But if the criteria changed,
the criteria, I mean, the floodplain development criteria, we've had criteria in the city since at least the 80s of some sort. The city of Ames, many years ago, and I'm talking prior to 15 years ago, I believe it was in the earlier 2000s, our freeboard or our protection standard was BFE +1.
when was this platted? Do you know?
This was platted in the 70s. This would have been, yeah.
That would be my guess, but okay. And obviously the hardship is exacerbated too, because obviously if you don't replace one, there's not much else you can do with it because you can't do anything else with the lot.
I mean, in terms of that particular claim, yeah, so to your point, you would have an open trail or an open home path.
Yeah. I mean, the only way to be clean it all out, replat it and rezone
Absolutely.
it and then,
Yep.
Okay.
And that's what we point out in the report is that
Okay.
the alternative is moving the homes out and filling the site.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any more questions for staff? Okay. At this time, if the applicant wants to come forward and present their case to the board, they can do that. Identify yourself and name and address, please.
Mike Plummerfeld, 6717 GW Carver Avenue, Ames, Iowa.
Mr. Fulmerfeld, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So first, I'd like to thank the board, obviously, for being here tonight and volunteering their time. And a really special thank you to Justin and staff. Justin did a great job coming out to the site. We've had multiple conversations, and I think it was really beneficial for him just to learn about manufactured housing and manufactured housing communities. I've got a 40-year history of being in the manufactured housing industry and being in manufactured housing business in Ames. And so I really appreciated their input and their interest in the project. So I appreciate that. As staff noted in their report, I feel like I agree we've met all the criteria for the approval of the variance. I'd like to strongly urge you to, I would prefer option number 1, which is everything that they're asking to be approved with the exception of the 15-year term limit. So I think with option number 1, the vast majority of the homes in our home communities that I own and this one are owner occupied. They own their own homes. And so, 15 years from now, to revisit this and to have a particular home that we'd need to potentially raise up an additional 2 feet, we come back to the same concerns that we have today. And it might also magnify those concerns. So that's the criteria that I would recommend. Happy to answer any questions that we can have. Keeping in mind that if we can approve the BFE +1, like noted in the report, if that ever changes over time, that +1 will also change with that. So that protection level will always be there for my residents. The other thing, I have a very long history with this property. Even before I owned it, I have a very long history with it. And, in 93 was really when they had a big flood names. And that's where maybe some of you guys weren't even born in 93, but I do.
I think we're all old enough.
Yeah. And so I
My
do
kids
remember
now.
that particular flood. And, the way the water reached this property in 93 was it came from the south, and there's a large culvert. There's a large culvert on South 16th Street directly south of the property. And so all the water backed up that culvert, and that's how it got to this property. We have had 2 significant floods since then, I think in 2010 and in help me out, Justin.
2008, we had a. pretty
Okay,
big
8 and
too.
10. And neither one of those floods, were there any significant flooding at all in this property? Because what happened was that the city identified where the water backed up, not only on my property, but all the other properties in that area. And so they've made a floodgate that they put down in there. And I've worked closely with John Joyner with Public Works, and John's awesome to work with. And so with any risk of flooding in the forecast, they come down, they put the floodgate in, and there hasn't been one issue with that.
You just have 90 more years to wait, or no, 70 more years because it's been 30. So
Right, right. Yeah, and the only thing I would require, if you do choose number 2, like Justin has asked for, is you need to stay on this board for another 15 years, so I can revisit this. So,
I have a practical question. So these are manufactured homes, right? They're not mobile homes as normally think. These are manufactured homes, correct?
that is a little bit of a play on words. A mobile home is something built before 1976. Okay. Before 1976, HUD, the federal government agency who set the minimum building criteria, was not involved with manufactured housing construction minimum standards. After 1976, the correct terminology would be manufactured homes. And so that means, any home built after 76 is built to a HUD code and has a third-party inspection at the facility before it's ever shipped.
So when these are shipped, they're still on a frame and trailer, right?
Yes. Yes.
And the frame and trailer's not removed.
correct.
But what is it set on? Is it just set on a pad, or?
So what we do, and I am and our staff are all state certified installers, and with the state of Iowa, and so all of our installations have to be inspected, and Justin's been in contact with the State Department that does that. So what we do, we auger typically a 24-inch round by 42 to 48-inch pier footing, and then we're provided an engineered drawing from the manufacturer for each particular home. And so they've calculated, pre-calculated load bearing points to support that home. And so that footing is drilled in the ground, filled with concrete. And then from there, we stack 8 by 16 open cell block in a double stack format, below all those load bearing points. So
So it's more on a pier than an actual foundation or pad.
well, the pier footing, is recognized by the state as a permanent footing.
Okay.
So it is all frost protected and
So,
anchored down to meet and secured to the ground and secured to those concrete footings to meet state code.
so my practical question is, why can't those be 3 feet instead of just 1 foot?
Well, I think to Justin's answers and what he's found out through our investigations, and I've provided all that information to the city, to go another 2 feet is a whole nother level of installation. So now we'd be involved in a crane to pick the home up, crane it over the top of neighboring houses, and potentially removing any mature trees that would take to do that. Those piers now, according to our state setup installation requirement, we can only build those piers so high. And so after a certain height, we wouldn't be meeting our state code. And so we wouldn't be able to do that. So then we have to go to a full sonotube construction and crane the thing on top of there. When we do it in the format, I think I provided some really nice pictures of what a finished product, we've done, prior to this requirement, looks like. And so we'll build a temporary dirt pad, so to speak, and we have the latest equipment in our industry, and we'll back the home up onto that. And, then once the home is there, we'll secure it and block it to code. And then we can remove that dirt ramp and build a nice landscape wall around it. So to do it an additional 2 feet, higher than that, given that I can only build the pier so high, that's where all that expense comes in that burden that Justin said that we've met, that financial burden.
Do you know what that maximum height of the pier is allowed?
I want to say it's, we're
24.
pushing just a little over 60 inches.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's 4 feet below, right?
I'm sorry?
That's 4 feet below you said 60 inches, but 48 of it's below the surface.
No,
You have to go down?
that's from the pier, from the top of the pier footing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that had to be below the frost line too. Then you had to.
No,
deep it had to be.
So no, we've got that 24-inch round cylinder, that's poured in the ground that is below the frost line, or 2 frost line below it, for frost protection.
So that ends at the ground level then, and the double block is above that.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
Mhm.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I got a question. So for the 93 flood, are you aware if floodwaters got into any of the homes that
Yeah.
were there at the time?
Well, in 93, there was damage to the homes, because all the homes, I think also, I provided a really nice photo of what a typical average installation set would look like. And so there were several homes that had some flood damage in 93.
Okay. But then it's your testimony in 2008 and 2010 that none of the homes had damage inside.
Not even close.
Okay.
And there are several homes that are still on property, that were there in 93. So
Yeah.
that they made those repairs and decided to leave the home there. And so, and that's the other thing that this will let me do. I mean, we really take a lot of pride in our neighborhoods and, having a neat, clean, tidy, safe place for people to live affordably. And, by doing this, it'll certainly allow me the opportunity as homes fulfill their useful age, to upgrade the neighborhood, to continue to make it a nice, clean place for people to live.
What was the BFE standard in 1993?
Well, I don't think there was one. I mean, obviously I actually knew the developer of this
2009,
property. And they, the one-off family built this property
Mhm.
and permitted it from the city of Ames. And so I'm sure all the homes were installed and set and built to the standard of that time.
Okay, so that, in this diagram, the 1 foot grading around each home, in the hash marks.
So I think what we're showing there, and that's something that Justin asked for, and it was a great request. What it shows is, the challenge and the difficulty and how to try to meet the current city standard, how it would diminish the number of sites I would have to have, because by raising it an extra 2 feet, the slope and angle of the grade would encumber all the neighboring lots around it.
So
So-
I misunderstood the
Yeah.
diagram, I think.
So that's what that diagram is showing.
Okay.
All right. Any further questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much.
Based on that, any questions back for staff? Justin, I assume the 1 foot is to the bottom of the
Lowest floor.
bottom of the,
The lowest floor of the home.
yeah, but the floor is, the floor sits on floor joist, so is it to the bottom of the floor joist or the top? Because you can it's to the top, so that's 10 inches already plus sheeting, so, okay.
I can.
I mean, I understand because it just doesn't, it gives you a foot.
Some of these, what I was just
I
going to
understand the pillar, yeah.
Yeah, what we look at, this is looking at from the outside, but I've talked with DNR on this. If you can kind of see where the mouse is right there, that is
Okay.
the
See that?
level of the floor of the home.
But that appears to be 3 feet above the,
Well, it's not 3 feet off the ground, it's 3 feet above the floodplain.
Flip-
right,
It's
Yeah.
based on
right, I
base flood
understand that,
elevation.
yeah, but this, yeah. Okay. All right, any other questions for staff? Okay.
Oh, I
Justin,
got
do you know,
a question too.
do you have an answer to my question about the floodplain requirements in 1993? Do you know off the top of your head?
So the 93 requirements I do not have. As far as our local city requirements, I'm not sure what we had. I don't have the information immediately available. We do have historic records.
Uh-huh.
It's something that certainly staff could get, but I apologize. I don't have that immediately available.
I got a question. Why is staff requesting approval of alternative 2 over 1?
15.
So-
year limit.
The
Yeah,
reason
the
that
15
we-
limit.
Sure. The reason that we are requesting approval of alternative 2 is because what this does is this keeps a sunset date for going back to our BFE +3 standard. So the reason that Ames has a higher standard than the state is because we feel that it actually has some benefits community-wide. It does have a positive impact on insurance rates. So because you have that higher standard, it assumes you have that much more. The industry term is freeboard in floodplain development, but basically you're required to elevate lowest floors to a higher level, so it helps protect against the chances of damage better. So we have that recommendation for alternative 2 because it puts a goal in mind in the future of eventually bringing this site up to BFE +3, whatever standard the city has at that time. Flooding is not going to stop. It's bound to happen again eventually. And so we just felt it was a better alternative than having a permanent variance here. That variance would stand as long as this was a mobile home park development. So, because the future is unknown, but we know flooding is going to happen again, we would like to have that compliance to BFE +3 in the future.
Now, would that be for new installs and all the old ones would be grandfathered in like this current one?
So at that time, when that time comes, if that's what the board chooses to do, anything that was permitted at BFE +1 under a hypothetical variance of BFE +1 would still be allowed to stand at that time.
Okay.
Anything new after that date would have to meet BFE +3.
Okay. That prompts another question for the applicant. If you don't mind, sir. I have another question for you then based on that. Actually, 2. What's
Okay.
the typical longevity for a manufactured home then? Like typical lifespan? It's not as long as a regular house. Not usually, I wouldn't think, but
Yeah, you know
there's some
what?
that are older. I realize that.
I mean, like, we all have people we know. It depends on how well you take care of it. When the roof
Yeah.
leaks, do you fix it? Or does it continue to leak and damage the home? And so that's a challenging one. I mean, they're homes.
Yeah.
So we have homes in our community that are built in the 70s.
It's getting pretty old.
Yeah. And so, yeah, but as long as they're maintained and well kept, then that's the kind of home that we want to leave, have in our communities.
What's your current vacancy you're looking at? What are the number of spaces that you're looking at?
Well, this particular community, I'm essentially 100% full in all my properties in Ames. This particular property, I have 14 vacancies solely because of this requirement.
Okay.
And I've got some other homes, I think I provided a picture of, some older homes that I've kind of almost been forced into buying rather than upgrade the neighborhood because the criteria is virtually impossible for me to meet. And so if I had this little bit of relief, but yet still give them the DNR protection that they have required in the state, it would allow me to, continue to upgrade the neighborhood and bring in nicer homes. And so to your point, when the home has kind of reached its useful life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
and the other thing that I think I did provide, as far as protection to my residents, I did provide staff. I'm not sure if it's in here, but I got a quote from a very popular insurance agent that provides a lot of service to our residents. And, the information he provided was that, and it's probably not just particular to this property, but, they go by the flood zone, I think, Justin, is that, the area that the insurance company referred to. And according to him, it didn't matter what the elevation of the home was. If your home was just placed in that zone, here's your rate.
Yeah, they don't.
And so they have flood protection whether the house sits 3 feet off the ground, or 9 feet off the ground. And so that is a certain of blanket protection, provided to our residents.
And do you advise the residents to have extra insurance because of that? Because they might not be aware that they're in the floodplain?
Yeah. Well, we make it aware to everybody
Okay.
that's on that property that they're in the floodplain.
All right.
Yeah. And, and if there's a lien on the home, if they get a loan on a home, which typically somebody's buying a new home, then the lender requires that insurance.
Okay.
So, yeah, absolutely.
All right.
And it's a very popular neighborhood. I mean, people like living there. We have a demand, and we have people wanting to live on those empty lots if we can do it for them as affordably as we can. And I know affordable housing in Ames is always a need and a concern, and so we're just continuing to try to fill that need.
Thank you.
I did want to add something from the staff side, just to give you a little better understanding of what the significance of 15 years is in our recommendation. So periodically, the FEMA and the Iowa Department of Natural Resources updates the flood insurance rate map, which sets those boundaries that you see up there. So 15 years from now would be into the next map cycle. So we would have an updated map then at that time. We just did an updated, excuse me, an updated map 2 years ago, 2021 actually. So 3 years ago now. So generally those map updates, they do vary sometimes, but they tend to try to run at least every 10 years. And so that's at least what we've seen historically is common.
Now, in the 15-year limit, we can't say now that they have to grandfather in all the ones that are pre-existing. We can't put that in the alternative, can we?
As far as adding in a condition,
Right.
That at that point,
I don't
the
think
ones
we
that have been
can
set
we?
over the next 15 years
Yeah.
have to be grandfathered. I guess I don't know the best way to answer that you can or can't do that. I think it's certainly something you could add. I don't know that it's necessary, since you will be, if through a variance you'll be allowing BFE +1, that will permit mobile homes during this period to be set at that.
I'm just thinking, I'm just thinking you're acting in reliance upon this. You put in the home and then 15 years later you find out, oh, you don't comply now. So the CUP's pulled and now you're like, okay, now we have to go back to fix this or not. And that doesn't seem real practical. Am I?
If I place a home in 2025,
Yeah.
I don't ever have to change it.
Okay. That's
It's
what I'm,
only when
that's what
it's-
I'm ensuring,
It's
because
only
his
when
fear,
it's removed.
his fear was that in 15 years, and I kind of agree, if it opens up this can of worms,
Any existing home in the park would be able to continue as
Okay.
is under a non-conforming status.
Okay.
Which means if it was damaged and destroyed, it can't be replaced, just like any other non-conforming in the city.
Right.
But if it's not damaged or destroyed and you don't move it, it's fine as is.
Okay.
What Mike is saying is, if that house goes away in 15 years, he's back in the same position
Right.
of whether he can put a new home on that spot or not.
Right.
And he could apply for another variance. Maybe there's other conditions that have happened that support that or don't. It's really unique that this is a floodplain variance with a condition. You would not see this anywhere else in the city, because this is an
Right.
element of DNR's language, not normal zoning standards for variances.
And on top of that, be only unique for this property. We're not.
I think it's really because to us, part of this was it's that transitory nature of the use.
Right.
Like the park doesn't move, but the user is different. And we thought that was a component that could go into those factors.
And
So
are there any other mobile home parks in Ames that sit in the floodplain or in the fringe? The ones on South 6th.
The ones on South 16th might have small portions of them that do.
Okay.
However, this one's the most prominent.
Okay.
It's entirely within, and this is the only one in the city that is literally entirely within the floodplain.
Okay.
So that, just to be clear, we're recommending we believe you can make the findings for the variance. And then the next step is, did you want to add conditions?
Right.
So it's not that if you don't have the 15-year limit, you can't support the variance. We're saying support the variance, but also add a 15-year limit to that variance.
All right.
Okay.
Any more questions for staff? We've probably got most of those answered. Okay. Do I have a motion at this time based on everything we've heard?
Motion to adopt option 2.
Okay. I have a motion to adopt option 2, which is granting the variance with the condition 15-year time limit, which is the BFE +1.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Whitehouse, second by Patton. Any discussion? As long as the others are grandfathered in, I don't have a problem with the 15-year.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, roll call vote.
Schneider,
Aye.
Patton,
Aye.
and Whitehouse.
Aye.
Okay. Motion for option number 2 passes. Anyone wishing to appeal the decision of the board may do so by filing a writ of certiorari with the district court within 30 days of the filing of the decision. With that, we have
Thank you. Thank you very
welcome addressed all the agenda items for this evening. Do I have a motion to dismiss? I'll make a motion to dismiss.
Second.
Second by White House. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We are adjourned.